Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. In today's video, we will understand Memo and useMemo. Now let me show you the problems they solve. Consider a scenario where you have a parent component, and inside a parent component, you have several components which are child components. So this is a parent component, and inside a parent component, there is first child component and second child component. Now let me show you the problem. When you re-render your parent component, every time you re-render a parent component, basically your child component re-renders too. Now let me show you the problem. Suppose this is a parent component, and let us suppose inside a parent component there are several child components. Like this can be navigation bar, this can be footer, and in middle there can be some components which show the main stuff, like showing the data or showing you the actual useful stuff. Now whenever you re-render your parent component, you don't want to re-render your navigation bar and footer every single time. You just want to re-render this component which is showing the data. Now, how do we solve this problem? To solve this problem, we use Memo. Now, let me show you when we use useMemo. This is a React hook. Now, when do we use this React hook? Consider this is your parent component, or this is your component, and inside this component there is a function. Now, this function is an expensive function. Suppose this is a function that calls OpenAI API, and now you don't want to call this function again and again and again and again. When you re-render a component, obviously if this function returns different value every time, you want to re-render this function, but you don't want to use this function again and again when you re-render a component every single time, and especially if this function returns the same value. If this function is always returning value 10, then why use this function again and again when you re-render your parent component? So to solve this problem, we use useMemo. Don't worry if you didn't understand right now. I will explain you every single thing while doing code. So let us move directly to Visual Studio Code and let us understand the problem, and then we'll also solve the problem. So I have created a very basic React application, and this is my app.js file, and this is my main component. So app is my main component, and I have two buttons. First button increments the count state, and second button increments the other state. Now each time I click increment count, the value of count gets incremented, and similarly for other. Now inside this parent component, I have a component called child, and inside child I am passing this count as a prop. So whenever I increase count, the child should re-render, but I don't want this child to re-render every single time when I change other. Let me show you the problem. So I will start my application. So npm start. Okay, I have my console open. Let me clear this and let me re-render my component. So basically, let me clear this for now. Now, whenever I click increment count, what happens is that this parent component will re-render. So when I re-render this parent component, this child component will also render, and the child count will be updated. So whenever I'm clicking increment count, this should get updated, and you should see child rendered every single time because I'm console.logging out. Now, whenever I click increment other, then I don't want the child to be rendered again and again, but in this case it will, because when I update this state, then this function or this component will re-render, and this causes my child component to render as well. So look, whenever I click increment other, the child gets re-rendered every single time. Now how do I solve this problem? I don't want the child to be re-rendered when I update other state. Basically when I update count state, only then I want to render this child component. Now how do I have to solve this problem? I said to solve this problem we have Memo. Now I can wrap my child component in Memo, and when I wrap my child component in Memo, only when this count prop changes, only then my child component will render. Let's see how it does. So inside React there is Memo, and I can basically wrap my entire component in Memo. Now whenever this count changes, only my child will get rendered, only then my child would get re-rendered, otherwise it won't re-render. So let's see. I will clear this. Now when I click okay, let me reload this. Now when I click increment count, you should see child rendering. So child is being re-rendered, child count 1, child count 2, child count 3, and this is getting re-rendered. Now let me close the console let me clear the console. And when I click increment other, my child component should not re-render. So you should not see anything in the console. So you can see whenever I'm clicking this button, nothing, my child component is not being re-rendered. And as soon as I hit increment count, my child component gets re-rendered. So using this memo, I'm making sure that my child component does not get re-rendered every single time when other state changes. I hope you understood about memo. Now let's see the useMemo React hook. Now I have created a very basic function. Now suppose that this function is a very expensive function, like this function is calling the API, OpenAI API. So when you call this function, you're basically hitting you're doing some expensive computation. Now, if this function returns the same value every single time, you don't want to call this function again and again, because this would consume extra compute. So okay, inside my paragraph tag, I have called expensive calculation function, and I should see the value returned by this function. So, and also I have done console.log. So let me reload this page, and you can see I have an expensive calculation result. So whenever I click any of this button, this component should re-render, and this should cause this function to be called again. So when I click this, my function runs. When I click this, again my function runs. When I click increment other, the value does not get updated, but when I click increment count, the value gets updated. Now, how can I solve this problem? In this scenario also, I don't want this function to run when other state changes. So when I click increment other, I don't want the function to be running. Only I want the function to be run when I click increment count. Now how do I solve this problem? To solve this problem, we have useMemo. So basically I can wrap my function in useMemo. So what I can do is I can use useMemo. Now useMemo is a pre-built React hook, and inside the useMemo I can pass an array dependency which says that when do I want to re-render this. When I re-render this component, when do I want to run this function again? So I want to run this function again when other changes, or basically or count changes. So whenever count is changing, I want this function to run, and when other is changing, I don't want to rerun this function. So let's see if this is working or not. So basically now this is returning the value, so I don't need to call this. I can just give the name of this function. So let me reload this page, and okay, so now whenever I click increment count, this function should run. You can see the function is running, but as soon as I click this button, increment other button, the function should not run. So as you can see, the function is not being run. Now as soon as I click increment count, the function is running. If you found this useful, please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you for watching this video.